How can you help us, though, continue to help you? First, please subscribe to the channel. Like us. If you listen to the audio version, leave us a 5-star review wherever you can. If you see our posts, please share those posts, share the content, and link back to our law firm website, which helps us to continue our SEO marketing and grow our firm and help small business owners. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the show. I'm Mitch Beinhaker, your host, and if you are listening to us on your favorite podcast directory, leave us a 5-star review. As everyone knows, we've been shifting over to the video channel more and more and more. We want to get people onto YouTube, so go there, subscribe, like the channel, share it on social media to keep promoting and keep connecting with people. Today, we have a special show because this show is a cross-continent show across the pond. Mark is in London. I'm in New Jersey, outside of New York, and we're going to talk about, well, Mark's going to tell his whole story, and then we're going to talk about some ideas about exiting your business, getting cash out of it. We always talk about succession planning that small business owners don't really think of when they should. So I remind everybody that any of the information we share on these episodes is for informational purposes only. It's not to be construed as advice of any kind. And if you're making any decisions from anything you hear Mark and I say, always check with local licensed professionals before doing so. Mark, thanks for coming on. I guess if it's 10:40 in the morning here, what is it like 4 in the afternoon, like 6 hours ahead of me?
Yeah, it's 3:40 in the afternoon, my friend. And thanks, Mitch, for having me on. It's an honor to be speaking with you today.
I appreciate it. So maybe you can start back when you were younger and your business deals and companies you've grown and sold and share stories.
Yeah, back in the day, where did it all get started? Oh, my God. So I'm 64 years old. Not that you'd ever think that looking at the video. I look 20 years younger, but, you know, it all started.
You look good.
Just all started just like anyone else. I graduated from university, found myself a job. For me, it was a job in sales, and it was in telesales. I started inside where so many of us start. You know, we start in the junior ranks, as did I, and sort of moved through that into sales, then management. And I kind of I fancied traveling a bit around the world, so I got a regional job in the UK, and then in Europe, and then across Asia, and then sort of global responsibilities as I kind of moved through to SVP and CEO positions. So my path to sort of business and over the decades hasn't really been that different to probably any of your listeners that are out there. Just for me, accidentally, things just took a different turn. I was in corporate doing an awful lot to grow other people's businesses. So I've done things like take a business from zero in value to 950 million in value in kind of a year to 18 months. Other things like, as if that wasn't enough, we did it again. So we did 140 million to over $1 billion in value in sort of 3 years. And people look at that and they go, wow. But you know what? There's a bit of a secret sauce or a formula that's easy to follow. You knuckle down on what companies do really well. You focus on doing that thing even more effectively, and you grow the hell out of it, and you get really good at doing that thing before you do the next things. And without realizing that's what I was doing from a sales point of view, that's what I was doing. But it kind of came to a bit of a head when in 2020. And if you remember, if I take you back, and not that I don't even think I want to take you back because it's going to bring up some memories for people. But if I take you back to then, around January, February of that year, we started hitting the pandemic. Do you remember that? And we went this thing
shut down mid-March here.
Absolutely, and so it was the same all over the world. And I remember being out in LA, and my wife called and said, "You need to get back. This thing's going to get serious." And I said, "What thing?" And she said, "This thing." I don't think it was even called COVID then. Right. But no,
so I don't know. We didn't know what it was.
Yeah, I can't. It was just we hadn't called it COVID at that time, but whatever it was, I can't remember. But I got back and we went into lockdown, and so we spent all that year in lockdown, and we got to and at this point, to paint the picture, I think I'm a successful private equity kind of guy. What private equity does is look for great companies to buy as cheaply as they can, and then they're going to put other businesses in that, and then they're going to buy other ones and bolt them in. Make a much bigger group, streamline them, improve operational efficiencies, all that stuff. And then over a 7-year thesis, which is normally how long they've got, they're going to sell it out. And if they do it well, they get a lot of returns for themselves and for their investors. Everyone's happy. But in that scenario, it's not always the business owners of the companies that they buy that do so well. Anyway, moving forward, we're in the pandemic of 2020. Your kids, my kids, everybody's kids were at home in lockdown watching the league tables every day of how many new infections, Mitch, how many deaths. And we get towards the end of that 2020, and in the UK, where I was in lockdown, we were starting to be allowed to go out in little tiny groups of 3 or 4, just for an hour a day. And then you could go out in groups of 6. And we started the journey of moving back towards normality. And so I was a bit off in that year. Something wasn't quite right, didn't know what it was. No major symptoms, didn't think I was unwell. But because in the UK, you've got the National Health Service, famed around the world for being a health service that looks after everybody, doesn't matter whether they can afford it or not. And then you've got the private, which is more like akin to what you guys have over in the States. And as a former resident of Boston, Massachusetts, I've benefited from that private healthcare system, and I know how good it is. So I go and get a check. And so that's in sort of November, December. And so I'm sitting there with my consultant, and we were talking just before we came on air about some of the British heritage, but we didn't talk about Windsor Castle, where the Queen was in residence then. So just picture Windsor Castle in your mind. And down the bottom of the hill, there's local... Down the bottom of the hill, there's
this is the end of 2020?
End of 2020, November, December 2020. And
who were you working for at this point?
I was working for myself. I was working as a consultant in helping businesses, doing all sorts of different things, mainly around growth at that time, but working in the M&A space. We were looking to buy businesses as investors to grow them and sell them. So you come into that. So I'm in this hospital with my consultant, and he says, we've got the results back, and unfortunately for me, the diagnosis at that point was I've got stage 4 cancer, and I had 6 months to live.
Oh my God!
And that was
oh my God!
Yeah, it was kind of Mitch, it's a show-stopping moment, because you sit there and think. My initial thought was, well, I'm not going to let it beat me. How do we win? And like most other people, I do a lot of counselling of people with late-stage cancer now to try and help them through from where they were, where I was, to where I am now, but where they are ultimately, is back where I was then. So the decision was taken to take the cancer out. It wasn't going to give me any more time, but it might. It might. So January, we go in and we take it out. While I'm there, pre-pandemic, everything in lockdown, somehow I managed to get the original strain of COVID, which didn't help, Mitch. So I've got COVID and cancer, and I'm recovering from that, but I'm recovering at home. So my temperatures are through the roof. I'm in this bedroom at home. It's got beautiful views of rolling hills. And, but there's a door in the corner where my son, aged 10 at the time, Thomas, walks in at 7 o'clock every morning because he's in lockdown. Of course, lockdown for him in that year, because the schools weren't doing much, was Xbox every day. But he'd check on Dad, how are you? And then it's late morning, lunchtime, because we do afternoon tea here, and then tea time. And through that week, when he's trying to teach me Xbox, and I'm trying to learn, I'm rubbish at Xbox, and it was really apparent I wasn't picking it up. My head was all over the place. But I had a call come in on the Thursday afternoon, which was West Coast, so about this time of day, just 2 hours before. And it was a friend of mine called Angela, who's become a friend, but it was we were trying to buy a business. And it was so typical, Mitch, of a business that you want to buy, but what the owner needs to get for that business and what you can afford to give them based on its performance. It's just a gap that was too big and we couldn't cover it. And I just happened to mention that, it's just, he said, what are you talking about, Dad? Because he was bored of telling me about Xbox and clearly seeing it wasn't sinking in. And I just said, it's a business we're trying to buy, but the gap's too big, we're not going to make it. He said, why? I said, because a lot of the time, what an owner wants for a business is just not quite what you can give them, and you can't figure out how to make it happen. So they end up keeping it. And he said, so what happens to those? And I said, they just never get sold. He said, so Dad, what happens because he knows they're all mums and dads, all grandparents. He said, what happens to their mums
when
and
they
dads?
think their business is worth more, their business is worth more than it really is?
Yeah, well, Tommy wasn't thinking about that because he's not money motivated. All he worried about was, Dad, what happens if their mums and dads, those businesses get COVID and they die? Who's going to look after their
Right.
families? Now, just think about the
Nobody.
context. Yeah. And his context is he's got a dad that's got COVID and stage 4 cancer. He didn't know about the cancer.
Right.
He knew about the COVID and he knew I had not. He's seeing the league tables every day. And he's very aware of the fact that, with COVID, none of us knew, Mitch, at the time, whether we were going to... This is pre-vaccine. We didn't know what was going to happen. None of us knew.
Right. Pre-vaccine. My daughter had COVID in November that year. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. So we're going... And all we know is that the older folks, me, we might or might not. And that's what he's thinking about. What's going to happen to me, but what's going to happen to all their parents if they don't sell their businesses? And so that was the beginning of starting to think about how you solve that problem. I wasn't thinking about it then.
Right.
I had bloody cancer, Mitch, and I was, and I didn't know if I was going to survive. In fact, they told me I wasn't going to.
Right.
So I was focused on getting better. Long story short, 3 months later, or 9 weeks later, I'm back with my consultant, who then said, "We've got some good news and bad news." I'm still in that same hospital at the bottom of Windsor Castle, in that dreary old Georgian style, for anybody that's familiar with brownstones over in the States, in Boston and places like that. It's that kind of building. And you're looking out over this dull and grey car park on a horrible, miserable day. And Mark sits me down. He says, "I've got good news, bad news." He said, the good news, what do you want first? I said, "Well, let's take the good news. I've had enough bad." To which he said, "You know what, Mark?" He said, we can't find any of the secondaries of your cancer." And I went, "That's good, isn't it?" He went, "Yeah." He said, "It's tremendous. It really is brilliant." I said, "So what's the bad news?" He said, "We just can't figure out why." Now, while he thought that was bad news, it wasn't for me bad news. I said, "Is that bad news for me?" He went, "No.
Right.
He said, we like to know."
Free, right?
So anyway, long story short, the conversation for another day, when we went through that, it turns out that there was about a dozen cases. This is now March, April 2021. Dozen cases coming through in the medical journals around the world. People like me, late stage cancer, not much chance of survival, get the original strain of COVID, and all of a sudden they haven't got cancer anymore. Nobody can figure out. And so we were talking about that. He said, "We think it's got something to do with this, but we've got no idea." I said, "Let's bottle it." He went, No. Because I'm thinking cancer cure, I'm thinking COVID cure globally, get it out there to everybody. He's saying, "No, it's not like that." He said, "We don't know what it is, but we think it's something to do with that." They still think that. Now, several years later, they think it's maybe something to do with immunology. I was in pretty good shape when I went in, apart from having cancer. I was pretty fit, in a gym, don't smoke, don't drink. So I positioned myself pretty well. But it gave me, it kind of positioned me in a different, in my mind, because from that moment to this, I know I shouldn't have been here, and I'm grateful for every single extra day that I get, Mitch. And I do think, I passionately believe I've been kept around to do something, but that do something has been slow in coming. So the thing about a 10-year-old is they don't forget. So he wanted to know what I was doing, which is why I wrote the book, which you can see in the background at Times Square, The Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free. Because if you fast forward to now, the problem that most of us have around the world in any business that we have in the SME sector is that when an owner comes to think about maybe selling, they don't get what they feel, what they should get for the business or what they need. Because the biggest thing they don't take into account is all the fees that need to be paid. Now, what are those fees? They're legal fees, of course, accounting fees, of course. One of your biggest fees, depending on where you are, is going to be a tax. That alone can reduce the amount of the money that you keep by 30%, 35%, or even 40%. Depends on where you are. But overall, in selling a business, Mitch, you could lose up to 50% of it. So I started to think about what could you do about that? And it turns out there are two things that can be done. And I like to call that, these days I like to summarize that as a double and keep it framework, because actually saving and reducing the leakages that I like to talk about isn't enough. You've actually got to grow the value of it as well. And we were lucky enough on this journey. I wrote the book. It was completely by accident. I did it to meet a promise I made to my son. I'm stupid enough to believe that if I wrote the book, people would read it. But it turns out, Mitch, that 80% of people that get a book don't read it anyway. So a podcaster saw it and invited me on. And then I started talking about this problem on a podcast. That's led to a lot of them. And now I focus on trying to share this message with people on podcasts. And then I'm speaking on stage about this in the States. And completely unexpectedly, somebody came to me after I'd finished and said, "That was really cool. Thank you very much. I'd like to help you." Now, I didn't know that help would be $22 billion from two family offices to support what we're doing. Because what they see, it was unbelievable. Because what they see is many companies they would like to purchase, but they're just not quite there. That gap is there, so they walk by, but nobody's in there fixing all of that. So we started to think about solving the problem in a different way, and family office money was the beginning of that. And that's led to 500 million raised in Q4 last year, which has come from the alternative credit space, which is much faster deployed. So what you can do now, and how this has grown to this point every time, I'm not doing this as a pitch, it's just to share the journey, is we've now got funds that we use to double the value of a business in about 6 months, in a way that owners won't have to take any equity dilution, and they don't have to borrow any money, so they can use the profits they're making to organically improve the performance of the business. And we will use the capital to build a bigger group of similar companies in that group. And that group, nearly every single time, it's not always the case, is going to be worth so much more than the individual company. And in that way, we can help a business that's worth 5 million that does nothing, keeps 3, worst case. Now we can help them become worth 10 and keep probably 9, because you can reduce the leakage in many cases to 10% or less. Sometimes you can reduce the tax to 0, but you still got some other fees. You still got some legal fees, quite rightly. It's got to be done properly. You still got some accounting fees and setup fees. You're not going to get away from those, but you can get that down significantly. So in about 6 to 18 months, we can make a massive difference to the journey that a business owner's potentially going to take. So that COVID cancer thing, and the promise I made to a son leading to a book, talking on stage, family office support and alternative credit support, has just kind of accidentally, without any planning, taken us on a real journey where we're trying to help as many businesses as we can double and keep what's theirs if they are thinking that they might want to exit. I get a lot of approaches. Can I provide growth capital? We can, but we don't. The problem we're trying to solve is for all of those businesses that have, maybe they've been working, serving and looking after their community for 20, 30 years. And now they're going to get a complete shafting when they sell and not be left with enough. So you end up seeing these people working in their businesses in their 60s, obviously, that's not uncommon, but in their 70s and 80s, when really it's time for them to have a really good time doing what they love, with who they love doing it with, and the financial security of making sure that they can do that. So that's the accidental journey that took us from where I was then, selfish M&A, working for myself as a consultant, working with M&A companies to buy low and sell high, to where we are now, which is actually flipping it completely and trying to help business owners double the value in a short period of time without dilution, without debt service, and putting them in a position where they can potentially then consider selling it and keep a hell of a lot more of it. And there isn't another firm that we are aware of that does anything like this. Nothing like it at all, as far as we are aware, Mitch.
So, Mark, it sounds to me like you're lending them capital, right, to grow the value of their business. And then what do? You broker the sale of the business? Like, how do you get paid besides lending them money? I mean, it doesn't...
Yeah. So we don't lend. So if this were your business, Mitch, I don't lend you the money, because I know in your case you're going to be off tripping around the world on the biggest holiday of your life. Now, so we don't do that. And I'm joking, of course, you wouldn't be doing that. But what we do is use the capital that we control to bring several companies together and form a bigger group. But we control the capital. We don't put it into a business. There are some exceptions to that. Sometimes we will work with a company that's got a great platform already, and we'll build around that to build bigger companies into a group. A lot of people see some similarity with what you'd call a roll-up, where a business goes out and buys lots of other businesses over time. The thing
That's what I
about a
was gonna
roll up is
say.
it can take
Okay.
7, 8, 9 years to get to that end game, depending on what the exit is that you want. We're doing something similar to that, but
Right.
we're critically not putting the money into the business. We're using the cash to assemble the companies, and then we're positioning that to be sold to a buyer. In most cases, we already know who the likely buyer is going to be. We're doing some work at the moment with some very, very big IT companies, for example, in the tech space. Everybody would know their name, but obviously we're under contract with NDA, and they spend $6 billion a
Right.
year buying companies. But it's the collective bringing them together that makes it a much better proposition for the seller, but doesn't make it any more expensive for the buyer, because they're buying a certain level of EBITDA in many cases, and the more EBITDA there is, the bigger the multiple might be. That does get to a point where that will flatten out, and there are other reasons why they might buy strategically and so on and so forth. But that's broadly,
Right.
the summary of it. So we're grouping and
So,
selling, and
okay.
we get paid. To
So,
your
for
question,
example, yeah,
we get paid on the
yeah, go
success.
ahead.
So we do get paid a monthly
Okay.
fee, because we got bills to pay. We keep the monthly fee very low, probably less than the cost of a single salesperson. So that's pretty low.
Okay.
But we do, if we will agree the value of the business now, and then we take a percentage of what we deliver in terms of the sale price of the business above that value. So if we agree that it's worth
Like a
10
success
million, and
fee.
it doesn't, and it only gets 11, and it only gets 9 million, we don't get any more money other than the monthly fee. But if we can get them to 20 million, then we take a
Okay.
percentage of that, and
The
every single owner
success
that we
fee.
speak to
Right.
is happy with that, because it's upside they weren't going to get. And we're bringing capital to the table. We are the investment capital partners, and we can do things in a way that it's difficult for owners to do that. So what do I mean by that? So owners can, of
Yeah.
course,
Give
attract
me an
private
example.
equity. Owners can, of course, attract private equity, venture capital. If you bring in venture capital, you probably dilute by 70%. If you bring in private equity, you might dilute by 50%. So if you're worth 10 million now,
Right.
you've got a private equity partner, now your piece is worth 5. That means you've actually got to get that thing to be worth 20 in order that you've doubled your position from where you started. And so what we're doing
Of
is saying,
course.
no dilution, you keep everything. No debt service, you keep all of that. So, but we just share in the extra that we get you that you wouldn't have seen, and everybody's happy with that. There's no model like that we're aware of anywhere.
All right, so Mark, so let's take, for example, let's say you own a dry cleaning business. There's a lot of dry cleaners in the United States. They're not really corporate. I mean, it's an industry really that is just really mom and pop for the most part. So you're
Yep.
saying that assuming you thought there was a market or you had a buyer that was interested, you would collectively get together 5 or 10 different, or maybe, I don't know how many different mom and pop shops, and they would swap their equity out for equity in this larger group, right? No cost to them. And then in theory, because they're grouped together and maybe you add some technologies and you add some economies of scale or whatever, you then can, instead of, maybe they were getting 2 times their revenue, now you can get 8 times their revenue. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I'm the end result is exactly what I'm saying. The way that we get there that you describe is not what I'm saying. So what does that mean?
Okay.
It means that and there are some, so there's a couple of levels to this. For us to be effective, the business needs to be generating 500,000 in profit at least. Now, many companies are not generating that. Some of your mum and pop shops and laundrettes won't be doing that. So what we've developed for those guys is free marketing tools. So, for example, from our website, people can just answer 10 or 12 questions in 2 or 3 minutes, and it will build out a soup to nuts marketing go-to-market campaign for them for free. The kind of stuff that you pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for: websites, emails, Facebook messaging, Instagram messaging, all of that stuff can be built out from templates. Now, we're using AI to help with that, and it will be 85%, 90% good, and it might need some tweaking. And you don't implement all of it. You implement the bits that you can deal with right now, and we provide that for people to help them get to 500,000 in profit. Once you're above that threshold, we'll group them together. Now, the structure on how we do that is a secret sauce, and that's not something I really want. It could be very varied. There's lots of ways of putting that together.
Right, I'm not asking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
of course. Okay,
but
so
absolutely, we're bringing it
give me
together
some
to make the
industries that
value
you-
bigger. To your point, to get it to that 8 or 10
Right.
times rather than 1 or 2. So here's an example. If you're doing 700,000 in
Yeah.
EBITDA, I will argue you're probably
Okay.
worth between 700,000 and a million. Now you might argue with me, no, Mark, I think it's 1.4. Okay, but it certainly isn't 10. And we'd agree on that. But
Right.
if I can get
Right.
those companies together so that we've got 10 million of EBITDA, then we'll be talking about a 6, 8, or maybe even 9 times multiple on that. So we'll group them in the right structure with a buyer in mind that sees the value of that and is going to pay that higher multiple. And in that way, if you take the
Yeah.
number of the companies in the group and divide it all back, they make 2, 3, 4x more than they ever would have made as an individual sale. And that's where,
Of
that's where
course.
it works for everybody. And so the end
So are
game of what you described
are
is
you
exactly what we do. How we get them with the
right.
structuring isn't what we do. We don't do any operational and performance improvement inside the business. So I would
Okay.
say if you're doing 15% EBITDA and you are messy and it's inefficient and it looks horrible, we don't play with that. We want you to keep doing what you're doing. Because actually, turns out, I would say 80% of the companies that we speak with that are interested in and aggressively acquiring don't want that done
Yeah.
because it's part of what they're going to do to help them get their investment back sooner. Because if they can streamline operations while protecting the legacy and the good name of the business they're buying, these are corporates, not private equity, then that
Yeah.
transition in what they're doing helps them get it to 22% EBITDA. In this example, I'm making these figures up, but that helps them recover their investment much quicker. And so they don't want it all streamlined. And chances are when you've streamlined it and turned it into a fabulous performance machine, it's not the fabulous performance machine that they particularly want. And they're going to change it anyway. So a lot of the time they ask us, don't do
Right.
that. Just bring it together as a group. And it's so simple, but you need capital to do this, Mitch. The reason we could do this is because somebody came to me after me standing up on stage and having the conversation we had at the beginning of the show, said, I'd like to help you with this. And that turned out to be, to help us with capital that we can provide, that's investor protected, that means that we can do this. Otherwise, without the capital, it's very difficult to do. You've actually then got to do it from the inside and do the traditional roll up that might take you 7, 8, or 9 years to do. And that's what we're doing
So
is that
Mark,
in 2 years.
Yeah. So what's the use of the capital? If you're not investing in the business, if you're not cleaning up their balance sheet, if you're not paying off debt, if you're not doing that kind of stuff, what's the use of the capital in putting this group together?
Because if we use the capital to acquire the group or build the group, and now we own the group, we've collectively got we've collectively got a much bigger EBITDA, and the EBITDA multiple. So going back to the example of 750k, let's say that's worth 750k,
Okay.
right? 10 million of EBITDA.
Okay.
Let's say that's 70, 80 million, because the multiple is going to be 8, 9, or 10. Right now,
It's going to be higher, sure, of course.
yeah, absolutely higher. So the capital is used to build the group, and the group is worth a lot more than the individual company. But what we don't do is go inside and improve the efficiencies. We leave that for the future buyer to make those efficiencies, because it's part of what gets them their return on investment back much sooner. So we're using the capital to build a bigger group, Mitch.
To buy the business? You're using the capital to acquire the thing and put it into this group? It doesn't make sense. I'm not following you. Because you're saying that the people don't get diluted. Yeah. They join the group, and let's say they're 10% of the EBITDA, and then it's now tenfold instead of twofold. They get 10% of the higher sales price, right?
Yeah, so if you've got 10 companies, they'll all be doing a different level of EBITDA as a percentage. So,
yeah, of course. Right.
So whatever that level is of that final sale price is what they get out. So if they're generating 10% of the higher sale price, then they're going to get 10% back out. If they're generating 5, they're going to get 5 back out. But the key thing to remember is that 5 or 10 is exponentially more in most cases, 2, 3, sometimes 4x more than they would have got for a single sale of the business. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand the formula, and I understand the grouping, and I understand the multiples, because I know how that works. When you have higher EBITDA, you get higher multiples and so forth. Yeah. What I'm saying is if the owner doesn't get diluted, meaning they're contributing the stock of their company into this group, and it equals 10% of the EBITDA pool, right? And then they would get 10% out, and you guys get a success fee when the business is sold. What is the capital on your side of the table being used for?
It's being used to build a bigger group, either through acquisition or by doing something else. And that's our secret sauce, Mitch, that I can't disclose on the show. That's the secret sauce that we do that no one else does. But we're building a bigger group with the capital. So however I structure that, I've got a group entity that can be offered to somebody that's willing to pay the group entity price, which is a collection of EBITDA altogether, which is worth an awful lot more. The detail. If I told you the secret sauce of how I do that, I'd have to kill you. I don't want to kill you, Mitch.
Well, I'm across the United States. I'm across the pond, but I'm not asking you to tell me what your secrets are. I was just saying that if you're not buying the business, in some cases you are buying the business. You might be buying a few of the businesses to roll them in, because people don't want to be involved, and then you take them over, or they still run them, but so there's some different use of the capital. Okay, that makes sense. So are there more industries where you do this more specifically than others?
Yeah, it's really dependent on a couple of things.
Maybe you're getting your calendaring from one software and you're invoicing from another. Evenoo is a platform that we use as one of our sponsors to run our entire business. And there's other features like auto payments and integrations with QuickBooks. Visit evenoo.com, EVONUE.com to learn more. There's also a link in the show notes. And be sure to tell them that the Accidental Entrepreneur referred you. This podcast is brought to you by our affiliate sponsor, iEmployee. iEmployee is a virtual assistant service that hires almost anyone for any role in your company right out of the Philippines. Most roles range from $7 to $9 an hour for highly skilled and experienced VAs. And whether you need an executive assistant, social media manager, video editor, customer service, sales, you name it, they have it. We use iEmployee for our VA services, from editing and promoting the podcast to all the PR and promotion of our law firm. iEmployee acts as a virtual field supervisor on the back end with live video monitoring and reports on a daily basis with screenshots of your VA's workday, and along with complete HR and payroll duties. No more paying for overpriced and underqualified workers. There's a link in the show notes to get a 1-week free trial, and I encourage you to take advantage of it.
Does the business make $500,000 in profit? And
right,
this
that
is a global issue. This can be done in any non-sanctioned jurisdiction in the world. There's that. And then I always ask myself the question, if I owned 10 of these today, who would buy them? And so so let's take a look at construction, right? So a lot of people in construction at the moment are going, we don't like it. A lot of the family offices have pulled back on how much they're investing because they haven't seen the returns that that they have in the past. But actually, that's just changed the nature of the market to say there might be different buyers. So Lowe's, for example, went out recently and spent over $1 billion collecting together specialist kitchen cabinet manufacturers from all over the country, all over the United States, and a few other things as well. Now, that's in construction, but it's in refurbs. It's in fiction. What do you call it over there when you remodel a house? It's in remodeling. And so,
renovation.
Renovation, remodeling.
Renovation.
And so, because when people can't afford to move house, they do a lot more improvements to their own properties. So it just diverts where the money might go for those that can afford it, of course. And so it changes what you might look at. HVAC, very, very popular, and red ocean, I would call that. So we would look at HVAC and go, do we feel confident that we've got the right buyer for what we might want to build together? And when I talk to people that are doing big HVAC investments, often they say we want them of a certain size in these states only. So you've got to really understand what your buyer market is, and then say, can I use the capital to build a group that these guys would want? All right. And so
you're kind of reverse engineering what you think the buyer is going to want, or maybe you know what the buyer wants, right?
I know what the buyer wants, because we'll go out and we'll look and say, do we think we can build a group here that would add value? This is all about achieving the mission, which is to make a difference to the 9 out of 10 companies that otherwise wouldn't have enough, potentially. So we've got those companies together that would potentially at the right price think this is a really good thing to do. and the legacy of that business is protected, and those owners don't have to go stage left. In fact, as you know, Mitch, a lot of the companies that make an acquisition want the owners around for a period of time, because not just the continuity of the staff, but the staff are everything, the customers are everything, and the owners care about all of that passionately. They don't sell to anybody, they sell to people that are going to take care of what they've built. So if we've got enough of those that we can potentially add value to, we'll make sure we got a buyer, and then we'll apply the capital to build the group to get a better price. Buyers are happy because they're looking at it as this is 10 million, not 1 million, right? So buyers aren't paying anymore.
Yeah, well, you're doing... Yeah, I'm saying, Mark, you're doing work for them that they're not willing to do or can't do. Yeah,
you're totally right. And the big thing on this is the deal flow, right? So some of the people that are looking to acquire that we work with, they won't touch anything that a broker's got. And that's not because it's not a good business. It's just because for whatever reason, it doesn't fit their model. Others will only work with it if it's going to go through a bank, which means that business is of a certain size, because that's going to be an equity transaction, and therefore it's regulated. It's going to go through a bank. And then others are doing both, and they're coming right down the market from... These are corporate buyers most of the time. We do very little with private equity. But it's not corporate buyers most of the time.
So like corporate acquisitions, like Lowe's as an example, they already have a consumer base that buy or looking to renovate their kitchen. So they say, okay, well, we'll acquire a group of cabinet manufacturers, so we have to control that. That makes sense. That makes and to be very, so Mark, you've worked,
and just to be really transparent, Lowe's is not my client. It's just a well-known, well-documented case, and so
just an example that people.
We didn't do that for them; they did that themselves. Yeah. So
got it. But it's just a good example that people can understand.
And we're bringing them together, Mitch, so they can have a conversation too, and trying to help and manage that. But we will help the owners get a much better price and keep more of it, so they can do whatever it is they want to do with a lot more money to do it with. In actual fact, we've got a team of advisors that will then do a couple of other things. So if you've now, imagine that you had a business worth 5 million and you did nothing and you ended up selling it and you kept 3.5 because of all the fees and taxes that you've got to pay. Now, if you could double it and keep most of it and you ended up with 8, what are you going to do with all that cash? And so half of the business owners are very savvy with what they can do and the other half are not. So we've got advisors in great companies like Allianz, or brokers that work with traditional safe products like insurance products and things like that can help those owners with that pot of cash potentially double it in the next 7 years. And how do they do that? They invest it very safely as a principal. You get maybe 16 or 17% gross on that. You're going to pay tax on that if you take the income from it, of course. But the thing is, you're now compounding that wealth, but you're starting from a much bigger base of maybe 8 or 9 million in the examples we're talking about, not 3. It's massive. And I am saddened that most business owners that I speak with aren't really in tune with what could be. And so we're trying to help and just give free information as to how they can do that themselves. And if they want to work with us, we can. But that's when we're going to bring capital to the table to accelerate. So everything that we do, they can do themselves. But where they need capital, that's the piece they can't do, because they're going to dilute, or they can't raise it, or they can't do the debt service.
Right.
Because what a bank will do is lend you the money if your quality of earnings is great. But if it isn't, they'll still lend you the money if you've got an asset, like a house, that you could put up if something goes wrong. So you get the digital input and take all the risk with personal guarantees. And if it goes wrong, you've lost your house. Well, we're just going right down the middle and saying we don't need to do any of that. I've come to believe, getting on my soapbox, my friend, that the model that we use today to buy and sell and value businesses around the world is broken. And it's been broken for years. There is a better way of doing it so that everybody still makes a really good return, but owners keep more without anyone else being impacted. It's right. And I would never have started thinking about this if I hadn't made a promise to a 10-year-old, who incidentally is now demanding royalties because he's in my book. He's saying, Dad, he's 14 now, right? He's 40. He said, Dad, you started this because of me, in his very British accent. Where's my royalties?
He's got
really, yeah.
But to your point, his royalties are you feed him, you feed him, you clothe him, you send him to school. Those are the royalties.
Yeah, and he says You make me go to bed when I'm wide awake. You get me out of bed when I'm fast asleep. You send me to this place called school, which I hate. And I can't do anything I want. And I'm going, well, you know, in later life, my son, well, you know, but that's 14, 15-year-olds all over the world, isn't it? But to your point,
all over the world.
Some of the investment is because we acquire. But we don't always have to acquire. We can group in other ways. There are other things that we can do. There's a couple of very unique things that we do that nobody does, which you know are a bit of a secret sauce, and it really allows us to accelerate. And those things I keep very close to my chest.
Okay, so well, we don't want this to be a sales pitch anyway. So, Mark, you must come across a lot of businesses in your work, and are there like what are some of the businesses that you've looked at that were really the mistakes that they were making and the things that they were doing wrong that that get in the way of the ability to sell the business or to exit the business at a decent price? Yeah.
So I don't think I'm going to tell you a damn thing here that you don't already know and that you probably have spoken about with other guests on the show.
Maybe I'm just the host. Yeah.
But one of the biggest things that can be a challenge to think about is that the owner is the face of the business. And without the owner, there is no business. That can make it very difficult. So I looked at a business yesterday that does great numbers. Yeah. It's doing nearly 2 million in EBITDA, but 95% of that is customer concentration with one client, and the owner of the business is the face of the business. So number one, the owner is the face of the business. Number two, the concentration is terrible. Now, those are two key things. And number three is, I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say I disagree with it, even though I'm going to say it. And that is systemization, operations, and procedures. What I mean by systemization, operation, procedures is most of the time here's the thing with standard operating procedures, right? People say, oh, write them down, write them down, and do it in a way that you can pass it to someone else. Well, do you know what? We're in a fast-paced environment in most of the businesses that we're in, and the day that you write it is the day it was accurate, and tomorrow it's out of date, but nobody goes back and changes it or retrains anybody. So people think on the fly.
Problem, right?
So people think on the fly, and they change those things. But when I'm grouping businesses together, I'm very mindful of a collection of founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, some of which do want to stay and take a bigger role and see a group as being an attractive proposition for them, some of which want to go. So I'm mindful of how that could come together to the benefit of an acquirer. That could be quite positive because it helps everybody. You don't always get that, but you've got to think about that. How do you make this attractive? And so, and then the systems, processes, procedures, I worry less about that because I believe that you can be really inefficient making 15% EBITDA. That's just an opportunity to improve, to make even more EBITDA. And I worry less about that than I do than I do the owner being the face of the business. And I worry less about that than I do, concentration risk. Now, businesses that are going to come forward that are absolute classics for the face of the business are going to be content creators. So you've got to get around. So I imagine the future, if you take somebody like yourself, Mitch, with a good following with what you do, and you build that following, because you're the face of the business, but you're not Joe Rogan, it's going to be difficult for you to sell this if you wanted to sell it. I'm not saying you do. But if we looked at the entire subscriber base that you've got for the show and the other things that you do and brought that together with 5 or 6 others or 10 or 11 others, that changes the dynamic completely because now you don't sell it as a business within its own right. You're maybe selling that as an ICP profile for a particular kind of company, depending on the listeners that you attract, right? So you've got
almost like a radio network, right? Because you have different shows. Right.
Yeah. So Elon Musk bought Twitter to solve the problem, to get distribution. We have to do it in a different way because we're not Elon Musk. So I see loads of opportunities like that. But classics are owner dependent and classics are too much concentration on and then lifestyle. Lifestyle hurts. So one of the biggest things we do make sure of is that owners keep clean books. What do I mean by that? I don't think any listeners run their business inefficiently, inappropriately, illegally, or anything like that. Sometimes, though, lifestyle businesses can extend to the fringes where maybe the trip that you do to North Carolina, which is a business trip, kind of pushes the boundaries of was it a business trip or was it a kind of a holiday thing? And that expense put through the company hurts the valuation. So cleaning up the books to make them absolutely presentable.
They're running the business. Yeah, they're running their business to minimize their taxes, not to maximize their value.
Yeah, and that shift.
Yeah, I understand.
That's a significant shift that we position for, but it's a significant shift that we try and help, facilitate. And we'll often do that through their own accountants. We won't go in there and mandate that. They got to, and especially when you've got fractionals involved. We do quite a lot of work with companies that have got fractional CFOs in there, and so this is an easy thing for a fractional to do, because it kind of helps. And so those are some of the key things. Now, depending on the industry that you're in, the rate of adoption of technology, digital, social media, still an issue depending on the industry that you're in. And we're seeing that a lot because since we started introducing the free tools that we're giving to people, it's been met with, oh my God, this is so cool, thank you so much. But the next challenge is, how do you implement that? Because they don't necessarily have the skills to, want to do that. So, you got
to get somebody to do it.
Yeah, so that then becomes a opportunity to accelerate growth because they're doing a lot of growth based on word of mouth and the people that they know, not necessarily actively going out and harnessing the marketing. So you could go on talking about all these things, and some of them will be applicable. So in the book, The Secrets to 10xing Your Business and Cashing Out Tax-Free, I covered 12 chapters, not including AI, of little things that you might do just to tune the dial. Not because anybody needed to do 12 things, Mitch, just because 2 or 3 things would move the dial. Things like opportunities, cross-selling and upselling, collaborating with other companies that make sense from a cooperative perspective and marketing to their base and they market to your base to boost sales. And it sounds really simple, and it is really simple, but lots of companies don't do it. And they're just low-cost ways that you might be able to drive more revenue.
There's a lot of low-cost ways.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of ways that businesses can automate. There's a lot of business can streamline using technology, and they don't do it. And some of them are because they're older generations. Like you said, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they're just not positioned to do it. You know what, Mark? I do a lot of transactions on the business side with business brokers, smaller businesses probably that wouldn't fit your profile. But, a lot of it is, a lot of times, I call this magic math. The broker and the outside accountant are trying to change the books to take all the things off that the business owner was really personal expenses, right? That were really, his 5 kids who work for the business, right? In air quotes, that each had a car payment or, meals and entertainment and travel and stuff like that. And they try to then come up with this EBITDA that didn't exist on the tax return, or their balance sheet, not their balance sheet, or their P&L to create value that on its surface didn't appear to be there, and it's hard for a buyer to swallow,
Yeah, and I'll look at those with a very open mind and say, look, some of those add backs, which is what we're talking about, are very justifiable and make sense.
Add backs, right? Correct.
Yeah. But some of them, you've got to look at it because when a business gets sold, it's not a computer transaction where you're just looking at the boxes and ticking it. Somebody's going to look at it manually because it doesn't happen every day. So if you've been doing anything which is a little bit interesting from an IRS perspective, expect them to be on it and ask questions. So you want to make sure you want to make sure it's clean. But I get add backs. And the job of an acquirer is to push back on those that don't make sense, and some of them do, like an owner's salary if they're not going to be in the business. It's an add back because that's going to stay in the business going forward.
Of course.
Except oftentimes the owner's not paying himself what he should be paying. So he might be paying himself 50 grand a year, but to replace that owner with somebody proper, a professional, is going to cost double that. So it can go in both directions. But I'm principally But here's the thing. I look inside the business unusually, and I get criticised for this. Not everybody agrees. And I say, look, whatever your cost base is, that's the maximum amount that I can save. And it still isn't enough. I've got to double the value of this in order that you, after you've paid all the taxes and fees that you're going to pay, even allowing for the fact that we might be able to minimise that for you, that you get so much more in your bank.
Right.
Because that's what counts. And when I started looking at what people could save on the 10x tax-free side of it, I just didn't think it was enough. So I thought, how do we grow this? And then I got really lucky because a family office got behind us. Only family office to do so, only people doing this in the way that we are. Then we combined it as a proposition called the Double and Keep It framework. And then we figured out a way. The great thing about family offices is they got more money than I can count. More money than you can count. More money than we could probably
Yeah, they're
count
just
between
looking
us.
to deploy capital.
The slow thing
Right.
about them is that they are slow to deploy, and sometimes money loves speed and transactions need speed. So the other sources
Right.
that we've got make an awful lot of sense, but we've had to spend a bit more time pulling those together to protect the investor cash, which is what we've been able to do. We've got some very clever, very proprietary ways of protecting investor cash so that everybody wins. So the mission has become to disrupt the ways in which businesses are valued, thought of, bought and sold all over the world so that owners keep more, but it doesn't cost buyers anymore.
Yeah.
And it's only through studying this and trying to meet the promise to a 10-year-old who now wants royalties, cheeky little monkey, that you get to the point where you think, the system's broken. This isn't how it should be. But it's been a great system.
Right.
But we just think there's a better way for a lot of companies. Some people agree with us, some people don't. But we're making a bit of a difference. But we're small. We're 25 people in the business focused on this. And so I'm just trying to spread the message so that a lot of people can self-help as much as they can. Everybody can do this themselves. It will take them 7 or 8, maybe longer years to do that on their own. It's the fact that we've got capital that allows us to really accelerate this and push it into 6 to 18 months. So 7 or 8 years is great. People are quite happy with that. And but with capital, we can get it done a lot quicker. That's, but I've got to be careful here. I want to help by giving information. I'm not pitching.
Right. So, Mark, you mentioned a bunch of things. So if people want to interact with you, if they want to get the free information because they're not quite where they need to be right now, how do they do that? We can put links in the show notes, but how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I wasn't even thinking about it. But if anybody wants to go to acquisitionsforyou.com, so there's acquisitions as a word, the figure 4, number 4, YOU.com, then the homepage is going to be a video of me having a quick chat, like 60 seconds. And from there, they might want to see, what is my business worth right now? All they've got to do is take 3 minutes and answer about 8 questions. Not even that. They've got to answer 4 questions, and we can show them what that double part of it's going to look like and give them comparisons between if you double, this is what it's going to look like, and if you don't, this is what it's going to look like. Then they can follow that through and have a little bit of what if I kept more of it? What would that look like? Then they can have a look at that. Now, there is a repeat and compound piece. The repeat and compound piece is not applicable to everybody. It's part of what I call double and keep it. Which is double, keep, repeat and compound. Repeat and compound is not relevant for anybody at the moment. It might be, but it's just optional things that people can look at if they want to. On top of that, if they want to grab some free marketing resources and specifically answer 10, 11 questions themselves about and build out a plan for themselves that they could deploy into their business free of charge, that's there for them. They can just fill it in and have it sent to them as an email. If they want to find out, this is a really cool one. Could they exit their business tax free? There's 3 minutes and 12 questions, and I can tell them, doesn't matter where the business is in the world, it doesn't matter where they pay their tax in the world, I can give them a view which will be very, very accurate, free of charge, of whether the juice is worth the squeeze for them. Now, if you're a much smaller business making 50K in profit, there's not much for you to save. If you're making, $1 million, 3 million, 5 million in profit, this is a big deal. This is a very big deal, especially if you're in California or in New York. So it will give you the summary of what you can do. It won't give you the detail on how to do it. Because I'm not a licensed attorney. And that's you. I'm not. If they then want to implement on that, I'll come to you and say, Mitch. Yeah, it's all on the website.
Yeah, that's all on acquisitions for you. Okay.
Yeah. And then if they want to get a view of their personal tax, if they're a high net worth, if they're a high paying W-2, and they can just answer 2 questions there, and we'll give them a view as to whether they might have been able to save money. So all that stuff is free. And then if you go into the detail of that and you want to know how to do it, when it comes to actually implementing that from a legal framework point of view, I'll probably bring them to you and say, you need to go and talk to Mitch, because you've got to have a licensed professional, as you said at the top of the show, to implement it. But to give you some context on this, one of my clients recently became aware that they're going to come into 200 million. The cost of doing nothing for them is about 80 million in taxes and fees they're going to lose. So they've been working with a professional for 15 months at the cost of 150 grand to sort out what they were going to do about that. Unfortunately, that professional died, and they came to me and said, what would you do with this? So we gave them, with the software that we've developed, a view in about half an hour of what they could do to minimize that down to less than 10. That's a 70 mil saving. Gave it back to them completely free. To which they said, we've just spent 150 grand over 11 months to get to this answer that you did in half an hour, for free. And I said, well, take this, pick the right people. But the benefit they get is they can walk in armed with the right conversation to have, so that 11-month window that they were being charged, just sort of dissipates. That's tremendous value for them. Tremendous. I should have made a charge for that, Mitch, but I didn't. So, it's just trying to help people keep more. And then there are, we're a smaller firm, so working with us, if anybody wanted to, is application, but it's where we're bringing capital to the table. So we think we can make a difference when we bring capital to the table. We can talk about that, but mainly what I'm trying to do is give people information that helps them self-help and keep more of what's theirs and double the value of their company. Anybody can do it.
Yep. No,
just not enough people are, Mitch.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely, Mark. I appreciate it. I think it was Zig Ziglar who said, you can have anything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want. So
yeah, I agree.
I think what you're doing is great. I appreciate you sharing your time today. And keep up all the great stuff from jolly old England.
You know what? Coming from you, I really appreciate that, because I know you're close to what I do, and I know you know your shit. And so thank you so much. It encourages us to move forward and fight the good fight. Eventually, we'll change the way businesses are bought, sold, and valued all over the world, Mitch. But right now, we'll do it one at a time. And
Sounds
for anybody
good.
listening,
Appreciate you coming
I hope this has been valuable. And by the way, if you want to get a PDF copy of the book, you can download it from the website. If you want to buy it from Amazon, you can do that. We make no money on the book, and the small amounts of profits that we do make, we give to charity. So we're not looking to make money from that either. So,
nice.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you, man.
In addition to being a podcast host, I'm also a small business attorney, mostly providing legal services in New York and New Jersey. With over 3 decades of experience, we can handle most transactional issues. So if you're watching the show and you encounter some sort of legal issue, reach out to us and visit our website, beinhakerlaw.com. Thanks for tuning into the show and for continuing to support us.